Bit of an alarming trend from Ford here. Not long ago, Ford offloaded one of its factories in Europe. It's ceased production of that factory because it's focusing on North America. Obviously, it's kind of becoming more of a North American company than a global car company. But the thing is here, BYD actually bought that factory in Europe, and now they're turning it into an electric car production site. Now, if that was an isolated incident, this wouldn't really be much of a story. But seeing as the same exact thing has happened in Brazil, but to an even greater degree, one has to ask themselves the question, should we be worried about Ford? Especially in light of the fact that they now have not a lot of demand for their electric cars, and they're slowing down in production intentionally because, well, they've now decided that EVs aren't as popular as what they said they were last year. Clearly, global sales prove that is wrong. So what's wrong with Ford? Something appears to be a little bit rotten. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. Great to see you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Sam Evans, and I've said it many times on this channel, I do actually love Ford cars. I don't know why. I've always loved the Mustangs and just a guilty pleasure. I've always been into Ford cars, and I've always preferred them over Chevrolet vehicles. If I was going to get, a petrol-powered car, it probably would be a Ford, to tell you the truth. But anyway, I'm not. So, what's going on with Ford, and why did they just pull out of Brazil? I mean, this is one of the biggest car markets. It's actually one of the biggest car markets in the world. It's growing very fast. Ford have actually just shut down in Brazil, right? Shut down in Brazil. They've shut down a lot of their operations in Europe. They are probably going to shut down operations in China within a few years, considering the way that their sales are going there. Not great. Where does that leave Ford with? Well, I've been saying this for a long time. It leaves Ford with North America. As long as they can maintain market share in North America, in fact, grow market share, they need to do that because they can. Why? Because the Japanese automakers are not prepared. Mazda, how prepared are they for a future of electric cars in North America? Not at all. I mean, Subaru, how prepared are they? Toyota, none of them are, not even remotely. So Ford can take market share. If they do, if they actually take more market share in the US, they can offset some of these massive losses that they're having in places like Brazil, China, and also even in Europe. Now, Ford has shut down in Brazil, and BYD has apparently come to the rescue. Now, I don't know if I'd say that. This is more like disruption, in my opinion. But Automotive News said they've come to the rescue. BYD are negotiating with Ford to buy one of Ford's shut down factories in Brazil. It's about 30 miles north of Salvador, which is the state capital of Bahia. On Brazil's east coast, the vast parking lot off Avenida Henry Ford sits empty. The factory has just been shut down completely. Shift workers once packed these spaces next to a Ford Motor Company plant that covers 1.8 square miles. That's massive. It's an area larger than New York's enormous Central Park. If you haven't been to Central Park, you need to go there. It's absolutely incredible. Probably the most amazing park I've ever been to. I rode my bike around there a few times, and you don't get a scale of it until you ride around it. And even riding at a fast pace, it took me quite a long time. Now, the Ford plant in Brazil, it's bigger than that. It's enormous. Alison Barreto Sousa, a Ford maintenance technician for almost 20 years, remembers when the company decided 2 years ago to shut down the plant, along with its entire operations in Brazil. Strange in what is a growing car market. Ford had a final ask. Could Sousa join a crew of 10 to perform the industrial equivalent of the last rites? Basically, the funeral of Ford in Brazil. He just couldn't do it. When I got married, I was at Ford. When my children were born, I was at Ford. All my good memories are somehow connected to Ford, says Sousa, now 39. But then, out of nowhere, came the silence. I asked not to come back. Today, Sousa hopes he can. No thanks to Ford. The new economic power in town is China, and its largest EV maker, BYD. BYD has now been selling cars in Brazil for a number of years, and it's planning on growing enormously. Those initials, BYD, stand for Build Your Dreams, a phrase that very much reflects the hopes of Sousa and thousands of his former Ford co-workers. BYD is wrapping up negotiations with Ford to buy the idle factory in Kamakari, about 30 miles north of Salvador. When the plant opens as expected later this year, it will be BYD's most extensive EV operation outside Asia, and it will eventually produce hundreds of thousands of electric cars every single year. The resurrection of the former Ford plant represents the grand industrial ambitions of President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, widely known as Lula. Much like US President Joe Biden, Lula dreams of spurring a manufacturing renaissance in Brazil. Both leaders are eager to provide blue-collar jobs that can support middle-class lives, fulfilling campaign promises. But there's an essential, and for the US, vexing difference. Biden aims to maintain an advantage over China in key technologies. Lula, a leftist who took office this year, is looking to China as the country's benefactor. Automotive News says that America has long played that role in emerging markets such as Brazil and is now threatened with a humbling loss of influence around the world. Remember, Chinese automakers have signed contracts within the last year to build their own electric vehicle plants in Europe as well. China is making EV-related investments in Chile and Argentina, as well as Brazil, building smelters and battery plants in Indonesia, and mining lithium across all over Africa. Relations with China reached a low under Lula's predecessor. That's when things were not so great for Ford. The right-wing nationalist Jair Bolsonaro, in March, barely 2 months after taking office, Lula visited Chinese president. In March, only months after taking office, Brazil's president visited with Chinese President Xi Jinping, seeking a detente. While there, he lobbied BYD CEO Wang Shanfu to reopen the former Ford plant. Basically, Brazil asked BYD to come, so they did. Lula regards Beijing as able to help Brazil's economy and its manufacturing in ways that Washington either can't or simply won't. The US Congress can be hostile to direct foreign aid, so the government can only nudge companies to invest by jawboning and tax and trade policy. China keeps a tight rein on private companies, exerting control so it can more easily align their decisions with national priorities. The president of China promised China's help, signing a $10 billion investment pledge after meeting with Lula. US officials had misgivings about Lula's uncritical attitude towards Yi. Linda Thomas Greenfield, the US ambassador to the United Nations, was dispatched in Brazil in May to repair frayed ties. That didn't do much. The next month, Lula met with Stella Lee, global vice president of BYD. "We are super impressed with Lula," Lee said afterwards. "He has a vision. He really wants BYD to bring innovation, to jumpstart Brazil's automotive manufacturing machine. Advanced technology here will build manufacturing in Brazil. This is the government we trust," said BYD. Now, Brazil has a lot of recovering to do. Industry now makes up about a quarter of its gross domestic product, down from half at its peak in 1985. Letha Spindola, head of industrial development and economy at Brazil's National Confederation of Industry, blames a chaotic and unfriendly tax system and poor, expensive infrastructure. Ford led the charge when the first automakers arrived in Brazil more than 100 years ago. The company initially imported Model Ts in kit form from the US and assembled them locally. General Motors and Volkswagen soon followed. Most companies set up in Sao Paulo and the port of Santos. The city became the country's Detroit, as well as the cradle of Brazil's labor movement. In the 70s, the industry spread to other regions, following a path similar to that of the automotive industry in the US, where foreign companies opened plants across the South, starting in the 80s. Brazil is now the world's number 8 producer of cars. The country tends to turn out economy models aimed domestically, in other words, affordable cars, and at other developing markets. In Ford's case, the now discontinued Fiesta and the car subcompacts and a mini SUV called the EcoSport. In 2001, Ford opened the soon-to-be Chinese plant in Bahia, in northeast Brazil, with renowned colonial architecture and pristine beaches. The area boasts a share of tourists that ranks behind only Rio de Janeiro, about 1,000 miles south down the coast. But Bahia's 14% unemployment rate is the highest of any state in Brazil. Bahia's governor expects a lot from Lula's strategy. A photo of him hugging the president dominates the wall of his El Salvador office. A rising star in Lula's Workers' Party, Rodriguez has helped lead negotiations with the Chinese for the BYD plant. He figures the company's EV and other investments, including possibly a battery plant, could create 10,000 or more jobs in the state. BYD is poised to make a big splash in Brazil. It's been selling EVs there for a while now, so it does have some understanding of the market. Visit the Victorian-era train station in the outskirts of El Salvador, and you'll find the headquarters of BYD's SkyRail. It's just starting to build 15 miles of track for an electric monorail. BYD spent more than $700 million just on research and development for this monorail. SkyRail will provide an alternative to Salvador's aging bus fleet, which BYD also plans to replace with electric buses. The monorail can transport 10,000 people an hour, including one day soon workers to and from the former Ford plant. BYD expects to spend $613 million to reopen the plant and has plans to mine lithium in the area to supply it. Now, what is really quite damning about all of this is the fact that this plant shut down only 19 years after it was built, meaning a massive amount of money that was lost by Ford. Really, BYD are paying peanuts on the dollar for this factory. And this really is disruption at work. Ford couldn't find a way to make manufacturing work, but BYD very, very likely will do so. And with a new product. I mean, who knows? It's possible that BYD through Brazil could actually take more of Ford's market share in other countries in Central and South America. And if not from Ford, then also from possibly General Motors and Volkswagen. Clearly, Ford's future is right now sort of hanging on tenterhooks a little bit. I think it's very precarious. They're being disrupted. Only 3% of the cars that Ford sell worldwide are fully electric. On the other hand, BYD, who are growing at an incredible pace of more than 100% every year, only sells EVs and plug-in hybrids. That, my friends, is a pretty scary situation if you consider yourself a fan of Ford. Thanks for watching.